and welcome to episode 88 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is April 14th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
So over a year ago, SAP announced the RISE with SAP offering. Here at Microsoft, we have actually seen quite a few customers in the recent months selecting RISE with SAP on Azure. The recent DSAG survey, however, showed that there's still a lot of skepticism and uncertainty about RISE. Then 2 weeks ago, Microsoft announced that we would also select RISE with SAP. So further enhancing the Azure-specific integrations, which also other customers hopefully will also benefit from. Today, Robert Biro joins us to talk about a document that we have created to outline what you can do today if you want to connect your existing workload on Azure to RISE with SAP on Azure. But before we take a look at this document and Robert walks us through the different options, let's quickly take a look at some of the news from this week. And it's not much this week, but I still thought there are a few things to highlight. So there's an upcoming summit, a Microsoft Security Summit, that talks in general about how to secure your infrastructure on Azure. How can you use a zero trust approach? How you what components are there available from Microsoft to secure your workload on Azure, but also if you're running solutions on premises or in other cloud environments. So this summit takes place on May 12th, and there are quite a few important, great speakers there. So I think if you have time, if you can tune in, then book your calendars for May 12th. Speaking on security, we talked about the Microsoft Sentinel for SAP solutions already. We had Joaf, Kobe, Anand, and some others already on the show. And now there's another virtual webinar about securing SAP transformations on Azure, where we talk about identity access management, Azure Active Directory, obviously. We talk about Microsoft Sentinel, and what does it mean from a security perspective, specifically to Azure, to SAP. So how can you secure your SAP instances running on Azure? There are speakers from PwC, from Microsoft. So I think that's also definitely 1 hour worth investing. Then finally, there's another upcoming webinar, RISE with SAP. So just basically setting the stage also for our topic today, RISE with SAP on Azure and Intel. There's a bunch of different topics that we talk about there. So why does it make sense to use RISE with SAP on Azure? How do you do integrations? How can you leverage other technologies like the business technology platform? How can you integrate in Teams and so on? So quite a few speakers, quite a lot of topics that will be covered. So again, 2 hours of your time in 5 days that I also think could be quite interesting. Okay, with this, that's all from the news from this week. So with this, I would actually like to hand over to Robert. Robert, maybe, I mean, you have been on the show already, but maybe you can still quickly introduce yourself. And then, yeah, I'm looking forward to walking through the document together with you.
After, yes. So yes, my name is Robert, and I work at Microsoft in the Azure engineering area responsible for architecture for SAP on Azure. So working directly with SAP and effectively together with the whole wide team that we have at Microsoft, the big wide family, really architecting the solutions that our customers will then in the end use to deploy.
Cool, great. And one of the things that you worked on, or that you are still working on actually, is this RISE with SAP and Azure integration. Because I think, I mean, a lot of customers, when they say, okay, I want to go with RISE with SAP, this managed service from SAP, I want to put it on Azure, because in a lot of cases, they already have other Azure workloads running. And now obviously the important question is, what do I do with this? How can I connect this? How can I here, what options are available? How can I connect my existing Azure resources with RISE with SAP on Azure?
Precisely. That was our intent in creating the document that we will just walk the customers through, the viewers through. Is the thinking is obviously this is an entirely SAP managed offering on Azure.
Good point.
It is completely in their hands, architecting by very good SAP architects. But we wanted to highlight how these two, I like to say, two islands can be connected via bridge. And we have focused on the network part of the network aspects of this bridge, so these two bridges can communicate. And this is where we wanted to really shed some light. It might not apply to 100% of the cases. There's always going to be custom specifics. SAP has definitely some flexibility in this, but we wanted to, together with SAP, worked on this, and we wanted to highlight what is the normal modus operandi, what is the preferred way, and what is even possible. So that's the intent of the document. It's high level. Yes, we don't go into details, but that's also the intention, because there is always custom specifics, and anybody who is SAP savvy knows every SAP system is different.
Yes, and I think the idea, as you said, was really to help customers get started. I mean, if I decide I want to go with RISE, then there are obviously a lot of benefits. I give a lot of the responsibility of managing my SAP system is transferred basically to SAP, so I can really benefit from that. But obviously, with any managed service, there are some boundary conditions. What can I do with this? What is allowed? How can I connect? And the intention of the document is basically to give customers a guidance of what is possible, what can they expect, and then they can still always go to SAP, to Microsoft, and ask more specific questions. But I think the idea about the document is really to help customers get started with their RISE with SAP on Azure journey.
Very well put. Exactly. That's the intention. And we will be definitely extending that, but current focus is the network architecture. Because as we know, everybody's building a house, that's always the first layer of bricks, that's always the foundations.
I was actually and maybe then we can go to the document as well. I was really surprised about the lots of feedback that we got. I mean, we just published the document. I mean, we quickly talked about this also on the podcast, but then there was already a lot of very positive feedback on the document. And as you said, there were immediately questions. Well, what else? What can we do on top of this? So as you said, network is the foundation, but what are the other things? And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, we are also working on enhancing this, but let's stay with what we have today. And let's take a look at the different network options.
Exactly. One feedback that immediately comes to mind when I'm about to present the website version is the pictures are clear, but I cannot click through them and I cannot zoom them. So I will be incorporating that very soon. So let me quickly share the Visio, because I can actually do it full screen then. Just one moment.
And while you open up the Visios, obviously the link to the document on docs.microsoft.com is also in the show notes, so we can just click on it. It's part of our overall SAP infrastructure related landing page on docs.microsoft.com, and there's now a dedicated entry that talks about SAP RISE integration, so everyone can take a look at that. But as you said, yeah, it's probably easier to zoom in to the different network components in the Visio.
Exactly. But as you said, it is on our Azure documentation. It is in the planning section for SAP architecture, so Azure, Microsoft, virtual machines, SAP workloads, under the planning sections, where we do have other also documents for integrating, but we are talking about RISE now. So the one thing that we wanted to really get on board, like I was saying, is the foundations, the networking. And the one thing that really is important to differentiate, let me quickly jump to Visio, is that the RISE, we have to really iterate this point for everybody, is RISE is managed by SAP, runs in an Azure subscriptions by SAP, So it's not the customer subscriptions. There are two different continents, two different areas, two different Azure tenants. In our pictures, we try to differentiate it, but I cannot really zoom something more in between, can I? It's kind of annoying a little bit.
But I think that's good. So I think
okay. Let's leave this like this. Yeah. So the orange part is the SAP subscription, which contains the SAP landscape managed by SAP. And on the left side, or bottom and left, the light blue side is the SAP customers Azure subscriptions, which subscription one or multiple, which is then connected together. Like you said, the RISE workload can be there first, and then the Azure workload comes next. So customers on this journey could be thinking, hey, I already have a SAP managed by RISE, or my SAP system managed by SAP within the RISE contract. Why wouldn't I have this also have my Azure subscription? And where do I go there? What is the high level architecture? Or the other way around, the customer already has their own Azure subscription and their non-SAP workloads, and they want to connect the RISE continent, the RISE island separately. And the two ways to connect it on the network level is really, well, the first one is VNet peering. VNet peering, we have a VNet, a virtual network on the right side, managed by SAP, this part. And we also have the customer's own network within Azure. From the perspective of RISE, the single RISE VNet is acting as a spoke to the customer's hub. So when talking about hub and spoke networking, like most customers in Azure already are aware of, we have a hub, which is your central connection point with all your gateways, express route, firewalls, what have you, shared services, and your other workloads running in spokes in other VNets. The RISE VNet, from this perspective, from your perspective as a customer, is one more spoke, which is connected through VNet peering. The one difference is it's a cross-tenant VNet peering. It's not just a VNet peering, but yes, Azure gives you the option to perform a peering between cross-tenants. So again, SAP's tenant and customer's tenant.
So it's interesting also from security perspective, you have a hub to separate. There is no direct connection between the customer spoke VNet and the SAP RISE VNet, right? So they are quite
isolated. You always go via the hub.
Yes, it goes via the hub.
Exactly. I mean, it could be also simplified if it's just a singular VNet. There's no hub and spoke. It's just a single VNet. For whatever reason, it could be also seen like that. But then that customer VNet acts as the hub. But like you said, it is from a security perspective. It's definitely important. We are always talking about private IP space, both within RISE and also at the customer side. So the typical RFC 19, I forgot the number, new space 10 dot private space, or 192.168. That's also used on both sides. So there's no public IP addresses of any kind. It doesn't go through the internet. This goes through private IP space, talks to a private IP space. And on both sides, on the SAP side and also on the customer side, there are NSGs in place limiting who can talk to whom by which port.
So both network security groups.
My apologies. Yes.
And I think, I mean, the peering just is the bridge basically between the hub and the different spokes. It does, for example, not mean that I can access the virtual machine on which S/4HANA is running on the SAP system, because this is all a managed service by SAP. And then there are obviously some restrictions of what I can do. But the peering, the VNet peering here allows us that I, at least to some ports, I can now have a connection from my non-SAP virtual machine that is running in my VNet on my Azure subscription, and then I can use the VNet peering to connect to a service on the virtual machine that is running the S/4HANA system in SAP's VNet, or in SAP's subscription actually.
Exactly. On the left side, the customer can set their NSGs as his and her security team they require, of course. On the SAP side of things, the default SAP ports or the custom SAP ports, depending what is agreed between the customer and RISE. Remember, Microsoft is not part of this. This is Microsoft, this is SAP and customers. They agree which ports will be open through this peering. By default, it would be the typical SAP ports, the 3200XX
for SAP GUI.
Exactly, the gateway connections, secure gateways. Whether ports like SSH or remote desktop would be open through this peering, that remains entirely up to the agreement within the customer. But by default, they would not be.
But actually, now that exactly, so there could be another virtual machine. So SAP also allows me as part of the RISE contract that I get a virtual machine from SAP in SAP's subscription, and then potentially I could have an access to RDP into this virtual machine and do whatever I want. But as you said, that is between me, the customer, and SAP. I need to define what is allowed, what can I do, how can I access the different components in SAP subscription.
Absolutely, exactly. It's a really a decision between the customers and SAP.
Okay, so
the
this
important
is the
message is important. It's protected workload. It's not that the one side opens the network, the customer network is open to SAP and everybody can talk with everybody and it's a flat network. No, both SAP wants to protect the workload that they manage and also the customer needs to protect the workload that they manage. So there's a mutual agreement what communication will be allowed, whether it goes through a firewall and so on and so on. So there's definitely, it is a VNet peering, but it is on mutual agreement and security.
That's actually a super important point because, I mean, I might want full access to the SAP system, but on the other, to the SAP subscription, but on the other hand, I really want to make sure that SAP doesn't have access to all my resources in my subscription. That's a really good point. So with the NSGs, I can further control really what is possible, who has access to what. So it's, as you said, a mutual agreed connectivity that is established here.
Exactly. And one more last point on the whole VNet peering cross-tenants creation. That is again done between SAP and the customer. There are some steps involved. There needs to be also IP space, which is agreed, which is not overlapping. So the IP space within SAP RISE needs to be a dedicated IP space so it doesn't overlap. Otherwise, VNet peering cannot be established. So this is also there's a few steps which SAP will walk the customers through, and again agree on what is beneficial and what works for both sides.
Okay, so this is the VNet peering, and I guess this is the most common scenario that we see right now with customers, that they that there is a back and forth discussion, obviously, with SAP. What should we do? How should we do it? But VNet peering is probably the most common scenario that we see.
Definitely the most common, and I don't want to speak for SAP, but I think also the preferred from SAP's perspective. Perfect. Now we are just talking about the whole Azure landscape. When it comes to on-premise connectivity, we'll speak about it a little bit later. So the picture is not complete. But as an alternative to this, if it's okay, I'll jump to the second one.
Yep.
And the alternative to VNet peering is VPN. So using a so-called VPN site-to-site connection. The principle is similar. Again, two different VNets, or the orange SAP VNet containing the SAP workload, the light blue as a customer VNets with the spokes, with the hub, everything in place like previously. The difference is the VPN gateway on both sides connected through a site-to-site connection. So IP to IP through the internet, but since both are running on the Azure side, it is going through the Azure backbone.
So why would I choose this?
Yeah.
Why would I choose?
It has been used by some customers when they want to more. First of all, when they have some concerns with the opening VNet peering.
Yes.
And this is allow more central point of access and single point of access into the network. And it's something that a lot of companies are accustomed to when it comes to suppliers or vendors or any other third parties. It's just in quotes a VPN connection or just another VPN connection. And yes, first of all, this easier overview and easier, shall I say, manageability from that perspective.
So if I'm saying VNet peering, too complicated, too much hurdles, too many things to consider, to set up, let's just install the VPN gateway, let's make the connection there, and then we have one single line that controls the connectivity, which might be okay, but as you said, probably the preferred method is really to go via VNet peering. And I would actually say, well, since typically this is not something that you do only for a sandbox environment, or that you only do to test something, but you really want to have this as a productive long-term investment, I guess customers should definitely consider the VNet peering approach.
It comes also with performance benefits. VNet peering, even across tenant, is line speed, so there's no restrictions of whatsoever. It is whether you are blue talking to blue within your own tenant, or you're talking, let me switch back, blue talking to orange. It's the same performance as long as you're in the same Azure region. There is no difference. Whereas with VPN, you have the limitation what the actual VPN gateway allows, which I believe is starting at 1.2 gigabits per second and going all the way to 10. They have different SKUs and options and price points. But yes, VNet peering is always flat. You get the max every single time.
Cool. Great. So now we have my Azure subscription connected with SAP's Azure subscription. So that's perfect. My virtual machines can connect to SAP virtual machines. We can consume content there. But now, obviously, I have probably still a lot of stuff on premises. So and be it only my clients that need to connect to S/4HANA, or that need to connect to another virtual machine. So how about the on-premise connectivity?
Exactly, great point. So on-premise in the pictures, we are going to expand the picture a little bit. I don't really like the zoom level. Is this legible if I do it this way? This is screen sharing in Visio is sometimes frustrating. Let me.
If you can do one more, but yeah, so I think that's good.
That's good now. So we are expanding the picture a little bit. We are going back to our, let's call it, preferred way of operation with the VNet peering across tenant. Now we have on the left side our on-premise networking. So we have our hub connection or hub VNet, where we have our express route or VPN gateway, which manages from a customer perspective, connectivity back to on-premise, simplified by a single headquarter building. Now, this is something that most customers who have already Azure deployed are familiar with. This works. How RISE comes into the picture, we have the connectivity. Remember, I said this is the orange part is a spoke to the hub. So we have the VNet peering established. We enable the VNet peering with gateway transit. So there's an option for VNet peering, which once ticked, anything in the spoke can then use the connected gateways in the hub to access further networks, basically going all the way from left to the right, meaning any users on premise are able to access to the customer's managed express route, the S4 environment or the BW4 or whatever else running in the HEC VNet. The point is there's no extra, or by default, let's put it this way, by default, there wouldn't be an extra express route going all the way around to on-premises as a separate connection. The RISE VNet is simply, in quotes, spoke connecting through the customer's own express route. Has the benefit for the customer that everything is centrally managed, the SAP RISE from an on-premise perspective, and this goes both ways, connecting to on-premise and on-premise connecting back. So both clients and applications. Everything is managed by the central firewall, central express route, whatever have you. vWAN is also an option, Azure Virtual WAN, instead of just the normal hub and spoke or what we are accustomed to. Also, Virtual WAN is an option, basically replacing the left part here with a vWAN hub. And from SAP, there is also no additional cost that the customer would have to pay, and also no manageability or complications with connections and so on. On-premise, from RISE, through your own hub. Done. Simple.
That's super cool. So just to highlight, so I already have some workload on Azure in my own Azure subscription. I'm running a Cosmos database. I have some virtual machines where I run some non-SAP workload. And for this, I have already established an express route. So everything's working fine from my on-premise environment to my Azure subscription. And now I decide I want to do RISE with SAP on Azure, obviously. So I do the configuration with the VNet peering. So that the new subscription from SAP, the RISE with SAP on Azure subscription, is now peered to my hub. Then I just need to enable the gateway transit functionality, and then I'm done. So I don't need to do anything on my clients, obviously, on premises. They just continue to connect via the express route to the hub. And from there, they connect then to my S/4HANA system that is now managed by SAP in the RISE subscription.
Absolutely correct, yes.
Cool. And as you mentioned, all the security features that I have probably already in place, all the things that I do on the hub, where I control the traffic, where I do whatever is necessary, is still in place. So it's just another workload that I'm adding now that can be accessed from my on-premise environment.
Exactly. It's just in quote, just another third party, just another vendor that I'm connecting to. The one thing to note, important part, is a single VNet can have only one peering with gateway in transit. So a VNet to VNet, one VNet can connect, I think currently it's either 200 or 500 VNets to. So it's kind of like a big maze that it can connect to, but only one of these peerings can be enabled with gateway transit. What that means, what I mentioned earlier, if I just quickly copy this, a second express route would not be possible because there is already a gateway or the peering is done with the gateway transit. So I cannot place another gateway in this spoke. So it's technically impossible to do. So from a RISE perspective, if a customer asks, I want to have a VPN connectivity for somebody else, no, it isn't. Azure doesn't allow that. Any incoming connectivity has to then come through the central VPN gateway or express route gateway.
What the customer manages. I would say with one central express route, you have just one, so it's easier to manage it, right?
Exactly. And also costs. Also
cost and costs.
I was just going to say that, yeah. Cool.
But meaning from when you go from on-premises or to either customer spoke VNet or to the RISE or other way around, you need to somehow resolve the DNS names, right? As the next topic.
Exactly. Very good. Carry over to the next chapter.
So how would you do it?
Now the DNS. How does a RISE workloads handle DNS? Typically, the SAP team deploys VMs. 2 VMs are deployed within the customer's RISE subscription, within the SAP subscription for the customer's workload, so the orange part. They actually bind the machines, so the Linux bind the daemon handling the DNS lookup. They handle a delegated zone. So a customer, again, this is an agreement with SAP between the customer. A zone in the DNS structure is delegated to RISE. Typically something like heck.customername.com or whatever else DNS name that the customer uses. I think heck is just historically coming from the HANA Enterprise Cloud. I think it still currently is used, but point is there is a dedicated DNS zone that SAP uses for a names resolution of the SAP workload. So all these orange VMs would have then entries in the DNS servers. Now, as long as everything stays within the orange part, within the RISE VNet, everything is fine from a name resolution because it is handled within. Now, when clients come into the picture, and client could be an end user on premises, let's talk with that scenario first. Obviously, the customer has their own DNS servers. They would then present this query through a forwarder to the DNS servers running in Azure, in RISE. So say a client wants to access s4prd.hack.contoso.com, the actual host name of the SAP system. The DNS server sees the query needs to be forwarded to the DNS server here, or a zone transfer is done. So the whole hack.contoso.com zone is kind of replicated, transferred to the DNS servers, and the DNS servers can fulfill the query of the client. So if I have the query here, I go to my DNS server, the DNS server has the zone transfer or a forwarder back to the original DNS servers running in RISE. Again, through my peering connection, everything goes through my private IP space. And this was from a client workload, but if I'm looking from a client as an application workload, some third-party application that accesses my SAP system and needs to resolve the hostname to IP, again, a query is sent to my DNS servers, in this case running in Azure, and there is either a zone transfer between them two or a zone forwarder sending the query to the DNS servers on the right side. But the zone transfer is the most typical scenario. That's why it's also depicted in the picture here.
So those hack DNS servers are Linux-based, bind?
Yes.
Are there any restriction to use on customer side the DNS server? Can they use Windows? Can they use the Azure DNS, for example, or to get this functionality? Or
as long as the DNS servers are capable of doing zone transfers, that would be absolutely supported. So thinking of Windows DNS servers on-premise is fine. But if you are thinking of using Azure DNS, a service that is running within Azure, that is not possible at this time because Azure DNS and Azure DNS private zones do not support zone transfers currently.
Okay.
So it has to be VM-based DNS servers.
All right.
I mean, but I actually think the whole DNS topic is something that can require quite a lot of thought. And I think Konstantin Popov has created a really nice white paper on the DNS capabilities. I think you also linked it in the document. And I think if I really start thinking about using RISE with SAP on Azure, then taking a look at this document, discussing this obviously with SAP is definitely also highly recommended, I would say.
Exactly. Fantastic point. Indeed, Konstantin Popov, a colleague at Microsoft, has created a blog post about DNS in Azure. So it's a PDF within a LinkedIn post, which is linked in the documentation. The PDF then talks about DNS for SAP on Azure, and one of the chapters also handles the RISE scenario. I'm trying to fast forward. There we are. Scenario 3, integration with SAP and RISE. So overall, the SAP DNS on Azure, but also the RISE specifics are covered in here. Very good white paper to look into.
Cool. Great. So I think now we have the connectivity from on-premise to our Azure subscription, to the RISE subscription on Azure, to other workloads, other spokes that we have. So the last thing that we need to talk about is connectivity to the internet. And obviously, this can be the business technology platform because we have the SAP Cloud Connector already here in the picture, but potentially also other internet-facing scenarios.
Exactly. And when it comes to connectivity, really the focus on the description that we do is for workloads for within RISE, connecting to RISE, or either inbound or outbound connectivity to the internet. Like you said, BTP is a fantastic example on SAP Business Technology Platform. Now, let's talk about the outbound connectivity maybe first. From the outbound connectivity, typically SAP performs or provides a proxy service, so a HTTPS proxy, which is then used to access content on the internet, providing, let's call it an internet breakout. This could be then, so the breakout happens from the RISE VNet. This is important to note that there is no connectivity when it comes to internet going from the RISE through the VNet peering, through whatever we have, and then going all the way around. No, the internet breakout happens at the RISE VNet. It doesn't traverse the VNet peering at all. So if you think about this way, any application within RISE which needs to access internet is going out through RISE and managed by SAP. And as part of my information, the SAP team handles or provides a proxy service for this. Again, probably customer-specific solutions can be agreed, but I think the HTTP proxy is the default scenario.
It makes sense.
When it comes to connectivity back from the let's take an example. We have a BTP application with our public IP address, which then communicates through the internet and wants to connect back to our S4 application through our SAP Cloud Connector, which again runs through our RISE. Now, the typical scenario that the way this connectivity goes through is application gateways. Applications gateways, again, managed by SAP, running in the sub-RISE VNet, which are connected and configured as with the S4 or whatever SAP system as the backend. The application gateways having the public IP address, and then going back. I mistakenly said cloud connector, but obviously you're talking connectivity, inbound connectivity here. So inbound going through the application gateway, which provide a public IP address, and also at the same time protecting the SAP workloads with all the features that applications gateway do.
Cool. Yeah.
So if I would reusing the existing building blocks as well here in these scenarios from the sub-cloud connector, for example, as an example for the BTP, right?
Exactly. It is in native first-party Azure services configured, and there is no really the important message, I think, is there is no connectivity from RISE back to the customer and connecting or inbound or outbound to the customer VNet. But yes, very good point, Goranas. Yeah. And the big distinction as well is, let's look at the blue workload, the SAP, the customer's own workloads, non-SAP VMs or non-Azure, non-RISE managed VMs, whatever it might be. So let's say we have some application connecting to BTP. So the application talks to the cloud connector connects to the internet and communicates back. But from a customer perspective, now this doesn't, the applications, the blue applications do not use the orange sub-cloud connector. Everything that runs outside of RISE and goes to the internet then has to go its own path. So I have my non-SAP VM connecting to my own customer managed cloud connector, goes through probably to my firewall, and the firewall then handles my internet connectivity outbound to BTP. And possibly the vice versa. I could have my own application gateways providing a public IP address with a web firewall as well within it. And then inbound connectivity to whatever I have is happening and managed by me. The distinction, blue workloads talk to the internet on their own, orange workloads are managed by SAP and talk to whatever connection any SAP manages for you. That's the distinction.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So the SAP Cloud Connector in the RISE subscription is really managed by SAP. So I'm just using it as a service. If I have an SAP Fiori Launchpad that connects to my S/4HANA system and retrieves some information there, then I have in my global account on BTP, I have my Fiori Launchpad. I have registered the SAP Cloud Connector, so the call goes via the RISE Cloud Connector to the S/4HANA system. If I have another application that I'm running on my own in my non-SAP virtual machine, and I want to connect to the BTP as well, maybe it's a Power App that we integrate in BTP. Then we can also use the Cloud Connector, but it's a Cloud Connector that I am managing in my own subscription. I can still connect it to BTP, to my global account in BTP. I can use the endpoint there. I can build a Power App on top of that. But in the end, I am responsible for managing this Cloud Connector, which makes total sense to me.
Yeah. And plus
Exactly.
full separation of the traffic between the HEC subscription and the rest, right? Which, from security's perspective, it's a must-have. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly. Managing support cases, troubleshooting, it just makes complete sense for both sides to be, so to speak, isolated in this case and not depending on each other.
Cool. No, I think this is really fantastic, Robert. And I think that the feedback that we already got clearly also shows that there is a lot of interest by customers to really read and see what is possible. I mean, it is, if you have been working in Azure, if you have been working with SAP on Azure, this all makes a lot of sense. But I think if you're new to RISE with SAP on Azure, it's just great to have some guidance that you can then obviously also use to enter the discussion with SAP and say, look, I looked at different options. VNet peering would be perfect. I need the Cloud Connector because I want to connect to BTP. I have several spokes or one spoke already in place that is connected to my hub. I have an express route already. So you have a really good starting point that you can use to use this in a discussion with SAP.
Exactly, that you start the journey a little bit prepared and don't have to really reinvent the wheel. The SAP team has a fantastic team of architects who have this already prepared, documented, obviously, and otherwise they couldn't be managed such a huge service at scale as they do. And but it's at the same time, it also provides the customers, hey, I have something already running in my own subscription. How do I connect to it? How do they communicate? And hopefully this gives at least a high level understanding, and the details always have to be agreed with SAP. And that's the primary that's the only contact really when it comes to RISE. Microsoft doesn't own any of it. This is really entirely SAP managed.
So we're just providing here guidance or an orientation from our side, but potentially, I mean, we checked with SAP, we worked with SAP on this, but there still could be something wrong potentially. So this is just an idea that you can use to discuss with SAP. In the end, SAP needs to say yes or no to these different scenarios.
Exactly. Do you want to quickly talk about the BTP connectivity that we have also a bit?
Sure. Yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to BTP, we in the above chapter for internet connectivity, we have talked about a lot how to reach the public endpoint. But SAP has a preview program for, they call it SAP Private Link Service, which is a private. Is it a private preview? It's in preview mode. Yeah. For customers that they can participate. So the connectivity with Azure happens through an IP, a private IP. It's no longer internet IP address or internet endpoint.
So it's basically through the Azure backbone.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think, Holger, we already had
this. Martin Pankratz.
Yes.
He already talked about this in a I think 30 episodes ago or something like that, for a fairly long time. But yes, exactly. And I mean, Martin has created so many fantastic blog posts on this already. Where he started with a very basic scenario. How can I connect? Yeah, here, thank you.
Exactly.
How can I connect my workload running on Azure to BTP on Azure? And then he enhanced it and introduced more topics. It's really amazing what he has done there. And I know he's still working on this. He's working very closely, obviously, with SAP on this. And together, they're really creating some fantastic content. And we see customers obviously really that have certain security requirements where the SAP system is not allowed to open any outbound connections, which obviously doesn't prevents you from using something like the SAP Cloud Connector. So they really have some very strict security concerns. And with the approach that Martin introduced here, again, I mean, this is an SAP service, just to be clear. The private link service is from SAP, but it's using functionalities on Azure. But this is really something fantastic. I'm always happy when Martin publishes another blog post on this topic to further enhance the scenarios. It's really amazing.
So basically, as you mentioned, Robert, there is no need to open any ports, public ports, right? Because it's through the backend. So security, it's even better. And plus, because it's a backend service, you don't use a wide area network, meaning expectation is even from the performance, network performance should be even better, so to say.
Exactly, Goran. Yep.
Cool.
So nice to see all those building blocks are fitting together.
Yeah, cool. And maybe when we can also put the breakout box somewhere down, linking to the previous podcast that have been done with Martin, which have been excellent on this very topic.
We will do this, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
I think, Robert, this is really an amazing document, and thank you so much for putting this together and walking us through this. I know you and a lot of other colleagues are already busy enhancing it. As said, we got a lot of questions already from customers that are just picking up on this and asking additional questions. What can we do with this? And I would hope that once we release the updated version, that we can invite you back on the show, and then we can continue our discussion on additional functionalities of what you can do when you run SAP on Azure or RISE with SAP on Azure and other integration topics that we can handle there.
More than happy to join you if you would have me. As keen eyes might have noticed, there already is a tab, work in progress. No, I'm not going to click on it.
Don't show this yet.
Nope.
Maybe sneak preview, you know.
There is more coming, and there's definitely a fantastic collaboration with SAP. Couldn't have been done both internally at Microsoft, Holger, Goran, everybody else working on this, and also with SAP themselves. It's really a great team effort, all this.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for guiding us through the whole document. I think there were some really insightful topics that you again mentioned. And as said, I would really hope that we can invite you back once we release the updated version, and then we can have another deep dive on the topic, on the integration topic.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.